Billionaire Victor Hale froze the moment he stepped into his penthouse office and saw a homeless girl cleaning his office, her tiny frame bent over his polished marble floor as if she didn't belong anywhere near the billionaire world he ruled. His staff never allowed anyone without clearance inside, but the billionaire was shocked to see a homeless girl cleaning his office, and even more shocked by the quiet dignity in her eyes when she looked up at him, clutching a broken cleaning rag like it was the only thing life had left her. Victor Hale was a man accustomed to power, precision, and perfection, a man whose trillion-dollar negotiation strategies could sway entire markets, but nothing prepared him for the trembling teenager standing in his office at dawn, whispering, "I'm sorry, sir. I just needed a little time." Her clothes were worn, her hands bruised, her shoes barely holding together, yet there was something in her voice, an ache too heavy for someone her age, that made the billionaire's chest tighten in a way money had never done. He should have asked security to remove her, but the moment he heard even a fragment of her story, a story that slipped out in small, shivering breaths, the billionaire felt the ground shift beneath him. Why was a homeless girl cleaning his office before sunrise? Why did her voice break when she said she had no other choice? Why did she seem terrified of someone else finding her here? And what truth was hidden behind the way she flinched when he gently asked her name? Victor Hale had built his empire by reading people, but this time he couldn't read her at all. And as he stood there staring at the homeless girl who shouldn't have been anywhere near a billionaire's office, one question burned louder than every warning in his mind. What story could make a ruthless billionaire hesitate? And what would he do when he heard the rest, when he heard the story that would make everyone speechless? Victor Hale never arrived at the office before sunrise, unless something weighed on him, and this morning the weight felt heavier than usual as he stepped out of the private elevator into the silent top floor of Hale Global. The city below was still waking, its lights flickering like scattered stars, but inside his penthouse office suite, everything gleamed in cold precision, polished surfaces reflecting the life of a man who had shaped his destiny through relentless control. He loosened his tie, thinking only of the board meeting ahead, until a soft, scraping sound reached him. It was subtle, almost apologetic, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a billionaire's office at dawn. He paused, tension tightening across his shoulders, and followed the noise around the glass partition. There she was, a fragile girl, barely 17, bent over the glossy marble with a torn rag, her hair falling in tangled curls around her face as she scrubbed the floor with the desperation of someone trying to erase her own footsteps. The billionaire's heart stopped. His staff never allowed unauthorized people up here. Maintenance never came this early, and no one, absolutely no one, wore shoes that worn, clothes that frayed, or carried that hollow look of exhaustion inside his world. She gasped when she realized he was there, dropping the rag as if it had burned her. "I'm sorry, sir. Please, I'll leave." Her voice trembled like a glass about to shatter. Victor didn't speak. He couldn't. His gaze fell to her trembling hands, bruised knuckles, and the faint outline of nights slept on concrete. She stood defensively, as though expecting punishment, yet there was something in her eyes, a painful resilience that silenced every instinct to call security. "How did you get in here?" he finally asked, his voice low, controlled, but softer than he intended. She swallowed, her throat bobbing nervously. "The door downstairs. It wasn't fully locked. I just needed a place to clean for a little while. I wasn't stealing, I swear, Her words tangled together, collapsing into silence as her eyes lowered to the floor again. Victor watched her, feeling something unfamiliar tug at him. He was used to polished executives begging for his approval, not homeless girls apologizing for existing. He studied her face, too pale, too thin, too young to carry such heaviness. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also something deeper, something he couldn't quite place, something that made him take a slow step closer. "What's your name?" "Lena," she whispered, clutching her rag again as though it gave her permission to stay upright. Lena Carter. The name washed over him, strangely familiar. He tried to place it, but the connection hovered just beyond reach, like a shadow in a memory he hadn't yet recognized. She kept wiping the same spot, her movements frantic, as though she believed cleaning well enough might justify her presence. He noticed the way her left shoe was tearing near the sole, the fabric of her jeans ripped not for style but survival, and the faint shaking in her legs, the kind that came from hunger more than fear. "Lena," he repeated, quieter this time. "Who told you to come here?" "No one," she breathed. "I just needed somewhere warm for a little while. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I'll go now, I promise." Her voice cracked at the last word. It wasn't defiance. It was surrender. Victor felt something shift sharply inside him. He remembered being 14, sitting on the floor outside his father's office, while the man yelled about quarterly losses, remembering how small and invisible he had felt. He remembered the night he'd run away at 16, sleeping behind a convenience store. Convinced the world had no place for him, he had buried those memories under billions, under polished suits and towering achievements. But looking at Lena, those memories rose like ghosts demanding to be acknowledged. Her eyes lifted just enough for him to see the flicker of humiliation, the instinctive expectation that he would call security and have her dragged out. Something inside him rebelled at the thought. "How long have you been homeless?" he asked softly. She blinked rapidly, caught off guard by the gentleness. "A while," she murmured. Since my dad disappeared." Victor felt the air thicken. Disappeared, a word that carried 100 stories, none of them simple. But before he could ask more, Lena's eyes widened with sudden panic, darting toward the glass walls as if expecting someone else to enter. Victor watched her posture stiffen, watched her clutch her rag as though bracing for impact. Something or someone had taught her to fear footsteps. "Who are you afraid will find you here?" he asked, sensing a deeper truth curled beneath her trembling. She didn't answer, but the silence spoke louder than words. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar, a promise he didn't yet understand, forming quietly in the space between a homeless girl and a man who had everything except answers. The silence between them stretched, heavy and trembling, until Victor stepped further into the room, the soft thud of his polished shoes echoing against the marble. Lena's shoulders tightened with every sound, as though she expected the world to collapse the moment he moved closer. Victor paused near his desk, studying her with the same analytical gaze that had dismantled countless corporate lies. But this time he sensed no deception, only fear, exhaustion, and something else, something buried under layers of hurt. "Sit down for a moment," he said gently, gesturing to the leather chair near the window. But Lena shook her head, stepping backward as if the request were a threat. I'd rather stand. I don't want to get anything dirty." Victor's gaze dropped to the rag in her hand, then to the fresh bruises along her wrist, partially hidden beneath her sleeve. His stomach tightened. "You're not in trouble," he said slowly, as though testing the words himself. "You're safe here." Safe? The word made her flinch, a reaction that rooted itself into Victor's mind like a splinter. He didn't miss the way she looked toward the hallway again, as though expecting someone far more dangerous than a billionaire to step through the doorway. "Lena," he said carefully, "who are you running from?" Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged, only a soft, choked gasp. It was a sound that belonged to someone who had been silenced for far too long. Victor waited, giving her space, something he rarely gave anyone. The city's early sunlight climbed slowly across the office floor, catching the reflection of the skyline in the glass and illuminating Lena's small, guarded frame. Finally, she whispered, "My father, or I guess I should say the people looking for him." Victor stilled. "What happened to him?" Lena looked down, twisting the rag between her fingers until the threads frayed. "He disappeared 6 months ago. We were living in an old trailer outside the city. One day he left for work and never came back. 2 days later, men came looking for him. They said he owed money. A lot of money." Her voice trembled, but the words pushed through, forced by a truth too heavy to hold alone. "They tore the place apart. They said they'd come after me if he didn't pay." Victor felt the temperature in his chest drop. "Did you go to the police?" She shook her head fiercely. "They said the police wouldn't help. They said they'd hurt me worse if I tried." The billionaire's jaw tightened. He had dealt with men like that before. Predatory debt collectors who hid behind legal loopholes, criminals disguised as businessmen. Hearing their threats echoed in the voice of a homeless girl made something old and dangerous rise inside him, something he thought he had buried alongside the memories of his own past. "How long have you been on the streets?" he asked quietly. "Since that night." She folded her arms as though cold, though the office was warm. "I got away using the back door. They didn't see me. I ran until I couldn't breathe. I slept in an alley the first night. After that, I just kept moving. Sometimes shelters, sometimes abandoned buildings, sometimes just the sidewalk." Victor felt a tightness in his throat he didn't recognize. Compassion wasn't a weakness he allowed himself often, but Lena's story carved its way through his guarded exterior with a precision nothing else had managed. He noticed the way she didn't cry, not once. The pain was too deep, too practiced, held in place like a wound she had learned to hide rather than heal. "How did you end up here?" Victor asked, though the question felt almost too small for everything she had told him. "I was walking past the building last night. I saw a janitor leaving. He forgot to close the loading door properly." She hesitated. "I wasn't trying to break in. I just wanted somewhere clean to rest for a few hours. The marble floor felt warm. I thought if I cleaned a bit, maybe it wouldn't feel like stealing." The billionaire almost laughed, not out of amusement but disbelief. A homeless girl had risked entering a skyscraper owned by one of the wealthiest men in America, and her instinct was to clean, to repay a place that hadn't offered her anything. "You were cleaning because you felt guilty for surviving the night?" he asked. She looked away. "Because I don't want to be a burden." Victor inhaled sharply, the words stabbing at a memory buried deep. His own mother whispering something similar when she worked double shifts to keep him fed. Lena continued, "People don't help for free. They always want something back. I learned that a long time ago." He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, until he was near enough to see the faint freckles across her cheeks, the dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights, and the quiet determination that still lived beneath her fear. "Lena," he said, voice low and steady, "I'm not like the people who hurt you, and I don't want anything from you." She finally met his eyes. For a moment, something fragile flickered there, trust, or the beginning of it. But then a sound echoed down the hallway. Footsteps, heavy and confident. Lena went pale. She stepped backward so fast she hit the glass wall, panic flooding her expression. Victor turned sharply, instincts snapping into focus. Who was coming? And why did a homeless girl look as though her entire life depended on not being seen? The footsteps grew louder, echoing against the marble like a warning drumbeat. Lena pressed herself against the glass wall, her fingers trembling around the rag she still clutched like a lifeline. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, and Victor could almost feel the panic radiating from her skin. Whoever she feared, they weren't just menacing shadows from her past. They were a present threat, one she believed could reach her anywhere, even in a billionaire's office high above the city. Victor didn't look away from her as he positioned himself between her and the door, the instinctive movement surprising even him. He wasn't the kind of man who shielded strangers. He wasn't the kind of man who stepped into fear that wasn't his. His world revolved around contracts, mergers, boardrooms, and billion-dollar risks, not homeless girls trembling in his office at dawn. Yet something in Lena's eyes tethered him to her, with a force stronger than logic. The footsteps stopped just outside the office, and the door swung open. "Good morning, sir," said Ethan Ward, Victor's chief of security, sharp eyes, military posture, a man trained to notice every detail. He stepped inside without immediately realizing the fragile disaster unfolding behind Victor. "We received an alert downstairs. A loading door was found ajar. I have the team doing a full sweep in case anyone unauthorized entered the building." Lena's breath fractured. Victor lifted a hand slightly, signaling her to stay still, hidden behind his silhouette. Ethan finally noticed the tension in Victor's stance, the way he angled his body protectively. His gaze swept the room, sharp and assessing, until it landed on the frightened girl half hidden behind the glass partition. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Sir, who is that?" Victor exhaled slowly, feeling Lena stiffen behind him. "She's not a threat." Ethan didn't relax. "She shouldn't be here. We need to detain her until we understand." "No." Victor's voice cut clean through the room. "You're not touching her." Ethan blinked, startled. He'd worked for Victor for 6 years and had never once heard that tone, calm, low, but carrying the weight of a man who would not be challenged. Lena flinched anyway, her fingers curling tighter around the rag. Victor turned slightly, catching her gaze. "It's okay," he murmured. "No one will hurt you." The words felt like a promise he wasn't sure he had the right to make, but he made it anyway. Ethan studied Lena more closely now, her clothes, her bruises, the fear etched into her expression. "Sir, I need to know what's happening. This is a secure floor." Victor breathed in slowly, aware that every decision he made from this moment forward would shift something fundamental in his controlled, meticulously guarded life. "She's been on the streets," he said softly. "She's seeking safety. That's all you need to know right now." Ethan hesitated. "But the breach, I'll handle it personally." Ethan had argued with Victor before about strategic decisions, about corporate negotiations, about security protocols, but never about the tone Victor used now. He bowed his head slightly, yielding. "Understood, sir. I'll inform the team to stand down on this floor." Victor nodded. "Thank you. And Ethan, discretion. Absolute discretion." Ethan's gaze lingered on Victor for a moment, then on Lena, a flicker of empathy crossing his eyes. He gave a small nod and exited quietly, closing the door behind him. The room fell still again, but the silence was different this time, thick with the aftershock of what had nearly happened. Lena slid down the glass wall, her legs buckling beneath her until she was sitting on the cold floor. She pressed both hands over her face, her breath shaking uncontrollably. Victor crouched beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence. "You're safe," he said softly. "He's not going to hurt you." "You don't understand," she whispered through her trembling fingers. "They always say that. People always say I'm safe until the wrong person walks in." Her voice carried a lifetime of broken promises. Victor swallowed hard. "Lena, who are you afraid is looking for you? Who would come after a girl who's already lost everything?" She lowered her hands, revealing eyes filled with a pain too deep for her age. "My father didn't just owe money," she said slowly. He worked for people who don't forgive, the kind who find you no matter where you hide. She breathed unsteadily. The night he disappeared, he told me if anything ever happened to him, I should run and never trust anyone, especially anyone rich. Victor stiffened. Why especially the rich? He asked, though his mind was already racing. Because my father said powerful men don't help girls like me, she whispered. They use them, they break them, they don't care who gets hurt. He said if I ever stepped near someone wealthy, it would be the end of me. Victor felt something sharp pierce him, anger not at her, but at the world that had taught her to fear people like him. The irony was suffocating. A billionaire she believed capable of hurting her was now the only person standing between her and a danger she couldn't even fully name. Lena, he said quietly, I don't know who your father was involved with, but I'm not like the men he warned you about. She looked at him, searching his face as though trying to decide whether trust was a luxury she could afford. Why are you helping me? She asked in a trembling whisper. Victor didn't answer immediately. He didn't have the perfect billionaire response, the polished line, the calculated explanation. Instead, he said the only truth that came to him. Because I think your story is tied to something I should have known long ago. Her eyes widened, confusion and fear intertwining. What do you mean? She whispered. Victor stared at her, realizing the pieces of a long-buried truth were starting to move, slowly, dangerously, toward each other. And whatever story Lena carried, it was not just hers, it was his too. Victor stood slowly, feeling the tremor of a realization forming at the edges of his mind, one he wasn't ready for, one that refused to be silenced. Lena watched him with wary eyes, her body still tense from the encounter with Ethan, her breath still uneven. But beneath her fear, there was something else now, a question she was afraid to ask, yet desperate to understand. Your father, Victor began cautiously. Tell me his name. Lena wrapped her arms tightly around herself, as though bracing for the world to collapse. Daniel Carter, she whispered. He used to work maintenance jobs, whatever he could find. Victor's pulse kicked hard. The name struck him like a blow, stirring memories he had buried beneath decades of ambition. He turned away, walking to the window, staring at the skyline without really seeing it. Daniel Carter, the quiet man who used to mop floors in Victor's early startup building, the man who always came to work early, who never spoke much, who had once bandaged Victor's hand when a glass shattered during an argument with an investor, the man who disappeared shortly after Victor sold that building. Lena, Victor said slowly, turning back toward her, I knew your father. Her breath caught, her fingers clutched the fabric of her sleeves, until her knuckles whitened. No, she whispered. You couldn't have. My father hated rich people. He said none of them cared. He said they'd step over you if it made them richer. Victor felt that accusation like a knife. Not all of us, he murmured. Not him. Not your father. He was kind. He helped people quietly. And he protected someone once. Someone who didn't deserve it. Lena blinked, confusion swimming across her face. Protected who? Victor walked toward his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a worn, faded photograph he had kept for years without knowing why. The edges were bent, the colors dull with time, but the faces were clear. A younger Victor stood beside a group of janitors and maintenance workers during the grand opening of his first building, and there, fourth from the left, was Daniel Carter, smiling in a way Lena had never seen, holding a small girl with curly hair in his arms. Lena's breath fractured. She stepped closer, her eyes widening, her hand trembling as she reached out toward the photo but stopped just short of touching it. That's me, she whispered. Victor nodded. You were maybe 4 or 5. He brought you to work that day because the babysitter canceled. You ran around the lobby laughing. You tugged on my pant leg and asked why my suits were so shiny. A soft, pained smile touched his lips. I didn't know then, but your father later told me that was the happiest day you'd had in months. Lena stared at the photograph, tears filling her eyes, not falling, just gathering like a storm she had held back for too long. He never told me any of that, she whispered. He never talked about people from work. He only talked about the danger. Victor sat across from her, the weight of truth pressing on him. Lena, your father disappeared because he didn't owe money the way you think. He was being hunted because of something he protected, and that was me. She looked up, stunned. You? Victor inhaled slowly, the confession rising like a ghost from the years he tried to forget. I was young, reckless. My first investors were not good men. They manipulated contracts, laundered money through shell companies using my early ventures. Your father discovered the forged documents while cleaning out a storage closet. He confronted me, asked if I knew what they were doing. I didn't. I was naive. He told me to get out before they destroyed me. Victor's jaw tightened. He saved my life. Lena lowered herself into a chair as though her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Then why did he run? Because the men he exposed realized he had seen too much. They wanted him silenced. I told him I would protect him, but he refused to let me get involved. He said they'd hurt his daughter if he stayed. He said disappearing was the only way to keep you safe. Lena covered her mouth as the truth hit her like a tidal wave. He left to protect me. Victor nodded heavily. And he has been running ever since. I hired private investigators for years, but he was better at hiding than any of us realized. And now, his voice softened. Now they might believe they can find you instead. Lena trembled as the shattered pieces of her past rearranged themselves into a truth both heartbreaking and healing. All this time, she whispered, I thought he abandoned me. I thought he didn't want me. Victor leaned forward, his voice steady and warm. He wanted you alive. Silence fell, thick, emotional, trembling with revelation. For the first time since entering his office, Lena cried. Not loud tears, not broken sobs, just a quiet, aching release of years of confusion and pain. Victor let her cry, giving her the space she had been denied for so long. When she finally lifted her head, he said softly, Lena, you are not going back to the streets. You're staying here under my protection until we find your father or bring the people hunting him to justice. She stared at him, hope and disbelief colliding in her eyes. Why? Why are you doing all of this? Victor exhaled deeply, understanding the final piece now. Because your father saved me, and because your story is the part of my past I never deserved, but the part I refuse to ignore. For the first time, Lena managed a small, fragile smile. And in the quiet morning light of the billionaire's office, two lives, once separated by fear, wealth, and circumstance, began to weave together into a future neither had seen coming.